Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you all today. It is an honor and a privilege to be invited to share with you my personal story of how my relationship with my biological mom was recovered. For me, it was right to reconnect as we did, though when I was little, I didn't think that it would be the right thing for me to do. Knowing what's right has always been important to me. I was one of those kids who always knew the right answer right from the start. In kindergarten, problems like how do you spell cat were easy when you were already reading the encyclopedias for a couple of years. Over the years, the questions got harder, and still I knew the answers. In retrospect, I'm afraid I might have annoyed some of my classmates. But knowing what I did, I thought I knew the right career for me to go into. Law school seemed like the perfect fit. The problem was, it turned out that in law school, it's not about finding the right answer. The professor would argue one side of the case for the first half of the class, and for the other half of the class, he'd argue the other, he'd argue one side of the case for the first half of the class and the other side for the rest. At the end, it wasn't clear at all which side had the winning argument. So I'd have to raise my hand and say, which one is the right answer? And he'd say, there is no right answer. The professor said, all you need to know are the issues for the different sides. And that was the hardest thing to learn, that there is no single right way for everyone to respond to a challenging situation. There's no black and white answer when you're dealing with shades of gray or with emotion. As hard as it was to get that notion through my thick head, understanding that turned out to be the best thing to prepare me for reunion with my biological mother. And still, I was completely unprepared for that to happen. Let me tell you what that moment was like. This is from the beginning of my book, and it's called That First Call. You should know what to do when the stranger on the phone tells you the name of your husband, your child, and where you live, and then has the name of your father and his hometown, and knows your mother just died. You should know that this woman will next tell you your birth date, but you cannot believe all the facts she has at her fingertips, the weight of all she knows. She even knows the hospital you were born in, something you were never quite sure of. And just in case you don't believe everything she has on you, she tells you details about your parents, details no one would know unless they sat down with them for a cup of coffee and a slice of pound cake. Characteristics only old friends have earned the right to tease them about, and you hear this stranger rattling them off, from your father's good-natured disorganization to your mother's Swedish practicalities, all on a that's the facts list recorded with clinical observation. And if you didn't know it before, you do now. You are deep in the midst of an identity theft. Not yours, because the life you lived was never yours to begin with. Because a lifetime ago, you belonged to this woman before she signed her name to the stack of papers she's reading from, back when she held the sole right for you to call her mother. And that's what it felt like 17 years ago when my biological mom found me through my adoptive mom's obituary. As you can tell, I never expected for it to happen. I wasn't looking, not at all. It'd been a closed adoption. With her call, I realized there was another side to the adoption story, hers. And here was my one chance to find out that story. Here was my one chance to say thanks. And to think that if I'd had caller ID back then, I might not have even answered the phone. Of course, I had no idea who was calling. And she called at a really odd time. It was way past 9 o'clock at night, 21 hours. On a Saturday night, my husband and I had been watching a video that for once wasn't so horrible, we just shut it off. So when the phone rang, I answered with my professional, "Don't bother me" voice. "This is Kate," I said. And she asked if my full name was Kate St. Vincent Vogel, and she confirmed my street, and that I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. And I said, yes, because I was aware all of a sudden that this was some sort of verification she was making. And she asked if I was the daughter of James St. Vincent of Medina, Ohio. And I was so sure she was notifying next of kin. My mom had just died a couple of months before, and I had been worried ever since that my dad had lost his will for living. I was sure he'd gone off the road somewhere, and they had just finally figured out who to call. So I said, yes, Jim St. Vincent is my dad, and my husband was hovering on the other side of the kitchen island, his face white with worry. And I was thinking next of kin, of course. I cradled the phone tight against my shoulder and pulled my feet up tight on the oak stool. And she launched into her next question, taking a tack I never expected. Talk about next of kin. She said, I gave birth to a baby girl, and she named the month, the day, the year I was born, and the hospital I was born in. She wanted to know if that was me. Now, training is meant to prepare you for the worst, so when it happens, your reaction is immediate, like you have a natural response. And before I'd gone to law school, I'd been a really trusting soul, never questioning anyone, even if they assured me the sky is green. But now my guard was up instantly, and the words came out of my mouth before I had any chance to think. Well, I was born in that hospital then, but I don't know how many baby girls were born there on that date. Then again, maybe it wasn't something that I really needed training for, like I told my sister when she said that we were adopted. Well, maybe you are, but I'm not. So the stranger said, I have some background information about that couple who adopted that baby girl. Would you like me to read it to you? So I could hear and be convinced that she was looking for someone else. That would be fine, I said. And so she began. Imagine having someone write 2 or 3 pages describing your parents without giving any physical description, just how they act, how they live, how they love, what hobbies they followed before they had you, what their family life was like when they were kids. Imagine someone telling you all the stories you ever heard around that dining room table growing up. And maybe ones you hadn't, but everything else is there and so tangible you're afraid to speak. This spell might be broken, and you would lose this lens you have to the past and the present and the future, and you have nothing to say. It's all so perfect. The life you had and the life you could have had intersecting in this one moment, and you are glad you were there on this stool with your husband across the counter from you, worry in his eyes, mouthing the words, "Who is it?" and him understanding when you scrawl across the notepad in suddenly uneven handwriting, these words of which you are certain, "My birth mother." And you will know there and then there will be things this woman you've never met will do for you, little things you shouldn't have to worry about, but you do because you can't help but think about your mom and because you don't want to have to retrace any steps just opened up along this path for you. And later, when you've had this woman in your home and shared the stories of your childhood, no one else would care to listen to but a mom or someone who would have liked to have been one. You will have the reluctant audacity to ask this stranger to do something that will break her heart all over again, like wait for you to make the next move. And she knows that could be never. I knew this might be my only chance to talk to her, my only chance to understand her side of the story, and yet I was holding her at bay. Why would I do that? Maybe I still needed more time to grieve, more likely because for so long I'd only thought of just one side, my side of the adoption story. I needed to learn about hers. That first phone call, I learned that Val, my biological mother, had come home pregnant from her first year of college. Her boyfriend, a grad student in art, could have married her if she wanted, but that's not how she wanted to get married. Her parents sent her off to a home for unwed mothers. She was told not to use her real name while she was there. She was given a pretend wedding ring for her rare excursions into town, to the store, to an art museum. She was one of 11 kids, and yet only one of her sisters knew about me. For a time, that sister had considered adopting me up until her husband asked what would happen, what would they do if Val returned to say that she was ready to take me back. The goal at the time was for adoptions to stay hidden, to be kept secret. With a domestic adoption, such secrecy was easy to ensure if you provided a good enough match for the child to pass, as if she could have been the biological child. That's what Catholic Charities had done for me. as I discovered in comparing notes with Val during that first phone call. Her father was an engineer whose family came from Italy. My dad was a mechanical engineer whose family came from Italy. My biological father's father was a chemist whose family came from Great Britain. My mom was a chemist whose family came from Great Britain. When Val placed me for adoption, she'd been told it was a really good match. It'd given her comfort at first, and then she began to wonder, was it something that Catholic Charities told all the girls? What was told to me as an adoptee? Nothing at first. I didn't even know I was adopted until my sister got in a fight with the neighbor boy. He kind of hit the end of his sparring ability, and then he threw out all he had left. "Yeah, well, you're adopted," he said. And my sister had to run home to find out if that was true. I don't know how he knew and we didn't. Maybe his parents had talked about it at the dinner table in hushed tones, in the way people do when talking about things to be ashamed of in this world. That outlook I have never understood, and maybe it's because I learned of it at the kitchen table instead of in the middle of a fight with a bully. To me, I've always seen adopted as something better than being born. To me, it means more than anything that you are wanted, really wanted, that you are meant to be loved, more than anything else in this world. My sister saw it otherwise, and maybe because she was the one who saw how Mom's face changed when asked if it was true. How could it possibly be true? Better to know from the start that you're adopted, better to share that information in a loving environment and be prepared should you ever have to deal with what my sister faced. A leading adoption research firm in the United States, the Evan Donaldson Institute, has found that the discrimination adoptees experience comes not so much from strangers, but from teachers, neighbors, family members. That such discrimination is not limited to transracial adoptions either. That's why my story was featured as part of a U.S. national news story about these findings, and that's why adoptive mom Elizabeth O'Toole wrote in on it to give to family members and friends. At first, I didn't see how being adopted changed anything. I figured my mom would still walk us out to the bus stop in her really ugly quilted bathrobe, but my sister had already seen the sides that people line up on with adoption, so she called everyone she knew to let him know where she stood. One by one, she told her friends she was adopted like it was some sort of terminal illness, and she wanted me to be there to provide some sort of emotional support, as much as a 7-year-old can give, I guess. Mom walked in on the middle of one of those telephone confessions, and she yelled, "What are you doing?" And she dropped her basket of laundry all over the bed. She said, "Don't do that. Don't tell everyone." And I don't remember what happened next. I imagine that my mom took me in my arms to comfort me, and strange, I don't remember her doing the same for my sister. It's not that it's bad, she told us. It's just none of their business. I was young enough to be more concerned with imaginary friends than our gossipy neighbors, but even then, I knew we were keeping an elephant in our house. Something big and stinky that belonged in the corner, but that took up the whole room. I don't know, and I didn't know all the sides of the story yet. That would come about 5 years after we were first told that we were adopted. My sister and mom got in a fight at dinner. Maybe it was a party my sister hadn't been allowed to go to. Maybe it was her grades who needed improvement. Maybe it was just a teenage attitude. But then my sister threw out the forbidden. Dad still can't believe that she used those god-awful words, but I swore she did because that's when I took my silent vow. Dad still says, "Boy, if I heard that, I would have," but I know what he would have done. He would have stood by Mom's side. He would have straightened my sister out, because that was the night when he grabbed my sister by her shirt collar and dragged her across the table so all the cups and plates were pushed out of the way by her body. And I need to tell you, this was not by any means our typical family dinner, not at all.